My programming teacher told me that if I could make Tetris in JavaScript, he would let me play Tetris in class. Now, making Tetris probably isn't a very hard thing to do. My only programming experience is one Roblox game, a few Arduino projects, and 1 month and a half of that class. If you're looking for a tutorial on how to make Tetris, leave now, as there are probably 20 better methods than the one I use. But otherwise, welcome to my week-long bad coding project.
We'll be rising high above the rising sunset, never gonna be the same. Thunder calling us to outer space, escaping gravity.
Okay, I pretty much know how the game's gonna work except for a few things. So, right here we have 4 garbage lines, and if I put this piece here, it's going to clear 2 of those lines, but then I'm gonna have to find a way to only delete part of that piece, because I can't delete the whole piece. And then I'll have to move everything down, so I'll have to modify every single piece in that affected area on the board, and I don't know how to do that. Okay, I think I figured something out. So, I have a bunch of arrays here. So this is the screen array. I'm going to be using this to write to the display on this side. And then I can change a number here to something else for them to be different colors. I'll have a function that writes this to the screen later. And then a falling array, I'll have this be only the falling piece. And then, so that I can use that with the permanent array. This will be all the permanent pieces, and I'll have those just be 0 and 1 for empty and filled, and I'll use those to check for collisions to see if I need to stop moving the piece. Then I have temporary array that I'm just going to use for math and stuff, and that also makes checking for line clears easy. I can just see if this whole row is 1s, then I'll know that that line has to clear. And this also lets me remove parts of pieces. I decided to first make the easiest thing, the bag system. See, in modern Tetris, the pieces aren't completely randomly generated, but instead generated using a bag system. The first 7 pieces will always be exactly one of each of the 7 types of pieces, and the next 7 pieces, and so on. This makes openers like SDPC possible, because you know that every single one of the bags are going to be consistent, and it's always going to be those 7 pieces no matter which bag it is. Okay, I finally have the bag system working. That took way longer than it was supposed to. Future Alex here to let you know that I carried Roblox Lua logic into JavaScript and tried to implement a rotation system that way. Yes, I am very smart. Okay, a few updates. You can now write to the screen. I'm going to have to add rotation sooner or later, so I've added arrays for every single possible piece state there is. And then another thing I've done is that I've changed the falling array to just 4x4, because every single piece is going to be no more than 4x4 on each side. And then to map that onto the main arrays, I just have this thing called piece array pause, which determines the positions of each of them on the main array, and I can just change these values to move the piece. The next thing I added was piece movement. So piece movement half works now. Yeah, I'm gonna need to fix that. Okay, so I've fixed that issue. So the problem was that the new piece is being drawn, but the old one isn't being deleted. So now I added this to delete the old piece, and then this to draw the new piece, and then replace the old position of the array with the new one, so that the thing knows where the piece is. We should also talk about the fact that instead of creating a function for a specific task, I would just copy and paste that task over and over again in my code. Okay, this looks very bad, and it is, but stay with me for a moment. So this right here checks that if this thing is less than 16, then it's going to just allow the piece to move directly. And then otherwise it's going to, because if it's less than 16, then the arrays entirely within the thing, but otherwise the arrays between layers, but it's possible that the one that's between the layers is the empty row. So this thing checks which column is the empty ones, and then it checks if this column's empty and it's in this position, can it move, and if it can move, it just executes the movement code. But then I remembered something that Tom Scott said in an episode of The Basics.
Repeating yourself like this is a sign of dodgy code. It's clumsy, it's difficult to read, and it's difficult to maintain. Create a variable called output that's just an empty string. So now, if whoever's running the interview says, make it work on 7s, not 5s, you only have to change one thing in an obvious place.
So I went through my bad movement code and replaced every instance of the movement code executing with the can move equals true, and just have it test can move at the end of the function. That way, when I added collisions later, I wouldn't have to rewrite the whole function. End of day 1, the piece can now move. Well, I celebrated that too soon, because I only tested it with the I piece, and the instant I switched the piece, everything broke again. Okay, so I fixed the pieces clipping into walls issue, and now I can hard drop the piece as well. But I need to make it not able to move after you hard drop it. Also, I have a lot of homework today, so that's probably gonna be it for today. If I wanted to finish the project, then I'd have to start working on more major game elements such as rotation, random piece generation, gravity, scoring, and all that stuff. But I've never made a game with this stuff before, at least not coded one. I've just pulled stuff from the internet or had someone else make it for me. Okay, so I figured out some better rotation logic. So this is the array that I have, and this is the same array except rotated 90 degrees. So to turn this one into this one, I don't need to have all of those hard-coded copies of every single piece. I can just have it replace the 0 with a 12, the 1 with an 8, and so on, until it goes through the whole thing and replaces everything. Okay, so I did a bad job explaining it back there with the whiteboard, but here's how it's gonna work. I have two arrays, current piece and temporary piece, each with numbers that represent certain colors. When the computer says rotate the piece, it's going to look at the first one in current piece and find that where it needs to go inside of temporary piece, and then it copies the current piece into the temporary piece. Then it does it with the next number, finds where it needs to go, copies that one, and it keeps doing this until every single number has been copied but rotated. Then it does the whole thing in reverse, going from temporary piece and copying every number back to current piece in the same position until all of current piece has been copied again. I couldn't figure out how to mathematically do this though, so I just hard-coded every single value into my code. There is a slight problem with this approach though. Because I'm using a 4x4 array that's mapped onto the larger array, it does allow for an issue where I can rotate the piece when it's at the edge of the wall, and while rotating the piece, clips it through the wall and splits it into two separate pieces. That's a future me problem though. Side note, the music plays now. The next thing I added was gravity, which was honestly pretty easy. All I had to do was add a set timer for the move piece down function because I already had one for moving the piece down manually. The last thing I added for today was the load next piece function. It first checks if the current piece is locked or if it's at the bottom of the board, and if it is, then it sets the lock to false so the next piece can move. Then it finds out what the next piece is by looking at the pieces placed variable that was updated every single time a piece was placed and modding it by 7 to find which position in the bag is the current piece. And of course, I once again hard-coded every single piece into it. Then this last part of the function resets the position of the piece back to the top of the board, updates the pieces placed variable, prints place the piece, and also generates a new bag if the pieces placed is divisible by 7, meaning the current bag has been used up. So at the end of day 3, I have a partially working game where I can drop, move, and rotate pieces. There are a few unfixed glitches though, and I'm going to work on that tomorrow. I have most of the major mechanics working right now except for collisions, because when a piece reaches the bottom of the board it should stop, and it does, but when it hits another piece it should stop before reaching the bottom of the board, and right now it doesn't do that. This is where the 4 arrays I created earlier come into play. Permarray and temporary store the state of the board at any given moment, but they only store if a cell is occupied or not the colors of it. Let's say in this case there's a T piece right here. Then temporary piece stores the piece being tested. Let's say that in this case it is this piece. Finally, piece array pause tells you where the piece is relative to the other arrays. Let's say it's at the top of the board. Then it's going to take temporary piece, paste that onto temp array, and see which ones are occupied. If it's occupied, it writes a square there. Then it checks for collisions. If there are no collisions, it writes that to perm array. Then let's say we want to do something to the piece. We want to move the piece. In this case, we're going to be updating piece array pause. Then we rewrite that to temp array and see if there are any collisions. With no collisions, then we write that to perm array. Let's say we want to rotate the piece now. We do the same thing, this time changing temporary piece, writing that to temporary. No collisions, update both temporary and perm array. But when there is a collision, let's say in this case where we want to move the piece down, then it just cancels the piece movement, resets temp array, and resets piece array pause, or temporary piece. So, this is not supposed to happen. I have no idea why this is happening. It turns out I forgot to delete the piece before rewriting it, so I just left a bunch of filled squares over the top of the board. End of day 4, I've added collisions. I haven't added line clearing yet, so I'm gonna work on that tomorrow. I have no idea why I panicked about line clearing that much at the start, because now that I have all these arrays, it's actually pretty easy to check for cleared lines. Basically, this first part of the code first checks for cleared lines by seeing if a line is full, and then if a line is full, it clears the line by deleting everything at the line, moving everything above it down, and also putting a cleared line at the top, and also increments the cleared variable by 1 to count that one extra line has been cleared. Once it finishes that, it checks how many lines were cleared. If there are no more tiles on the board, that means it was a perfect clear and it gives a large bonus for that. And otherwise, it just gives a bonus depending on how many lines were cleared. And then it replaces the temporary array with the new permanent array of all the cleared lines. By the end of day 5, I had a mostly working Tetris game where I can place, move, and rotate blocks, and also clear lines. Remember that rotation glitch where if I rotated a piece at the edge of the board it would clip through the whole board? Well, I haven't fixed that yet, and I'm gonna try to do that on day 6. My final solution ended up looking like this. First, I just rotated the piece directly. Then I checked which columns of the piece were empty and where the piece's position was. If the piece was in a position near the edge of the board and there was an empty column, then good, the piece can rotate. But otherwise, it's going to clip through the wall, and then I stopped the rotation. I had a bit of time left after finishing that, so I decided to add a little UI as well as the hold feature. Along with UI, there was one thing that I tried to fix today. My old code, instead of deleting the picture every time and drawing a new one, I just draw a new one over it, and so the old picture was still there. So every single time it was loading something, it would load all of those shapes, and that was causing a lot of lag in the later stages of the game. So I just changed it so that it would instead just delete everything and redraw it every time. However, because I didn't sync up the two separate time schedules, it started flashing. Also, I did try to add a ghost piece, but it was just so annoying that I gave up. I added the next queue, score counter, and level counter to the side of the screen. And I decided to include 6 next pieces so you can see the entirety of the second bag once you finish placing the first one. At this point, the base game was complete and all that there was left to do was bug fixes, but there are a lot of them. But I decided to put that off until Now, when I said there were a lot of bugs with that game, I wasn't making an exaggeration. There were a lot of them. The game would give you a perfect clear if you holded the first piece. That was a pretty easy fix. The rotation would randomly break. That was not an easy fix. Sometimes dropping a single piece can cause the whole board to clear due to an off by 1 error in my line clearing code that I didn't notice until ChatGPT pointed it out. Overall, despite the pain of searching for a bug fix for 2 hours, this was a really fun and enjoyable project, and I think anyone who's a beginner to intermediate programmer should try this project. Figuring out the logic for screen updates, movement, rotation, piece spawning, and collisions was quite challenging, but nothing beats the satisfaction of finally getting another mechanic working. And when every single mechanic is added, every line of code is written, and every bug is fixed, nothing else beats the satisfaction of finally finishing the project. But for now, I'm Alex Lee, and this was my Tetris game in JavaScript.
I'm not a soldier, but I'm fighting. Can you hear me through the silence? I won't give up, 'cause there will be a day we'll meet again.